a little bit behind on where we are with DOA and things. I did talk to Camille this morning to see how he looked at it and that.
Okay, so it's a significant new development.
Yes.
Yeah.
Paul left me a voicemail, but I never got a chance to actually talk to him in person, so I don't know. Okay. All right. There's other things I'm unaware of. If there's unknown unknowns. You know what I mean?
Don't worry about it.
In your way. That's a little.
We're perimeter here. This is Woodland, man. We haven't got the nice screen in front of us.
We only got the
TV
electricity
pops
about
up
6
out of
months
the
ago.
hole.
No. Right. Sorry about that. I can switch seats with you or something.
I'm going to sit here because I'm going to charge too. There's 2 plugs.
Okay, got it. All right, well.
Yeah, there's one at each end. Fortunately, my current seat is at the other end.
Oh, good. Yeah. We have them up on the thing. You know, like basically right in the front.
Hold on, I got to talk to the TV guy.
Yes. I didn't get a reply. I just said that I think it would be helpful. Oh. When I get a text that says these people are nuts, which probably means people are.
You should say, tell me something I don't know. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. Calling the meeting to order for the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency on April 19th, 2018. Let roll call. Leanne, or you want to do our roll call for us? Or?
Oh, okay, sure. We have the chair here, Skip, Vice Chair Brett Lee, Directors Will Arnold and Director Tom Stallard. And absent is Don Saylor from Yellow County and Camille Kirk from UC Davis.
I think Camille's planning to be here, though.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I haven't heard otherwise.
I think she's planning to be here. I know Don is still out of state, so he's not here. So, okay, with that, we would like to approve the agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
We approve the agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Public comment. Is anyone here from the public that would like to make a comment on any item not on the agenda? Or
Oh, Mike Webb.
seeing none, we close public comment, and at this time we go into agency business, which is closed session. So we'll adjourn down to the conference room that Leanne has opened for us. It's just down the hall to the left, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you.
should have.
You were there, you
Yeah.
were there.
It was a good
I
time.
was there.
I know my wife always, when we're out drinking, it's loud. She wants to tap me.
Yo, I can hear you.
I'm gonna guess that my computer is sufficiently charged for our purposes. Let me just look at the.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, we're good. You can. Yeah. Yeah, we can unplug it.
Talk with you after this.
I'm gonna. Tom's gonna trip, and then he's never gonna be able to do that copy over the monument tour.
Let's go, folks.
You can just put it right down here. Yeah, thank you. Perfect. All have to leave.
Thank you very much.
Making up stories.
We'll
This
get
is the
back in
Starbucks where
session.
the Declaration of Independence was signed.
As a result of the closed session, although it took 35 minutes, there's no reportable action. So at this point, we go on to the consent items, the approval of the January 18th and February 21st meeting minutes. Do I
I
have a
move consent.
Second.
total consent has been moved? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item 3, Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency operations update.
Hi, good afternoon. A relatively brief update for this month, both on just agency's general operations and then also the progress of construction at the joint intake, and then Stan will take over and talk about operations for the agency. A couple of topics we have today is where we are, where the agency stands with respect to our grants and our loans. On those two, quick update on the construction project that's underway at the joint intake, and then 2018 water supply outlook. In terms of grant funding, the agency has received pretty much all of the $40.2 million in joint intake funding, 20.1 from both the federal and the state. We are awaiting reimbursement from Bureau of Reclamation for the following. There's a $980,000 that has been received by early 2035. We expect to be reimbursed for that in the next few days to a week or so, maybe a little bit longer. There's an additional $246,000 that's outstanding that has been submitted to Bureau of Reclamation for payment. However, there is a bit of a new wrinkle in that there's been a recent change within the Bureau of Reclamation in terms of processing payments. Anything over $100,000 now has to be approved in Washington. However, they have not yet put in place their processes for approving this. We don't yet have a date as to when we can expect this money to come out. It's a very recent change, happened right about the same time this was submitted for reimbursement. So we're hoping to get that done and receive it to the agency within this fiscal year. In terms of the SRF agreement, we are in the process of closing out the SRF loans. The only thing that's really remaining at this point is some paperwork. We have to prove that we did all the labor compliance, environmental documentation, and several other things throughout the duration of the loan. We're in the process of finalizing putting that rather large package of data together and getting that to the state. We have, however, completed all of our reimbursement requests to this date, and we have been fully paid for all of those eligible costs. So the final loan amounts for Woodland ended up at just over $103.294 million. Woodland's loan authorization was right around $111.5 million, so we came in roughly $8 million under the SRF authorization. City of Davis SRF loan, the final loan amount was right around $89.4 million. The authorization for Davis was $95.5, if I remember correctly. So both the SRF for both projects came in significantly under budget, which I think is great news for the agency. In terms of joint intake construction, you may remember we had there's really two work elements. There's the canal side work element that we had put into the contract. They needed to have completed by April 15th of this year. The reason that date was in there is because Conaway Ranch needs to start flooding their irrigation canal and using it for irrigation right around April 15th of this year. We did include in the contract a $50,000 bonus for the contractor. If they chose to do the work in April and finish it by April 15th, they would be eligible for that bonus. We put that into the contract, if you may remember, and that was to kind of encourage them to do the work during the rainy season, some risk to the contractor in doing that. However, that makes our overall construction program much cleaner to finish the work out within the dry season. The reason why we did this project as a separate project is because last year, the river stayed high for too long, it was wet for too long, and we were not able to complete this work as part of the intake construction. So the contractor has completed everything that's on this list. That work all has been completed. They did meet the April 15th deadline, so they are eligible for that $50,000 bonus. So when RD 2035 is ready to flood their canal for irrigation use, they have no restrictions that are caused by our project. On the Riverside work, they did install a few things that were required so far, geotechnical monitoring equipment and bulkheads for the concrete conduit work that needs to happen. They have some pictures on that in a second. Riverside work has not yet started. They cannot start that work until after April 15th and after the river has dropped below a certain level, which I believe is elevation 14. Those are regulations given to us by the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. It is considered flood season until after April 15th.
Yeah, they've already started it.
Oh, they have?
Yeah.
Perfect. Sorry, yes, nice. Here, there's a few quick pictures of a joint intake construction. The picture on the left is the structure is RD 2035's waterfall structure. There's a couple of things with that I would like to point out. We did run into a little bit of an unknown during construction. There's a wall kind of on the, let's see if I can move the cursor over. There's a wall right here that was originally planned to be included in our project to be constructed. However, when our contractor arrived on site, started doing some cleanup work to get ready to do the work, we found out that it already had been constructed. In the course of doing that work, they did cut into the top layer, or really expose rather, the top layer of some tieback reinforcing that was installed for that wall. We worked with RD 2035 and also the actual contractor that designed and built that wall on the appropriate remedy for that work. I wouldn't call it a repair, it's more of we've exposed these wires and essentially how do we properly bury them. So what we are doing is we installed a concrete slurry mix and then some additional fabric and riprap on top of them. It's actually going to be better stabilized than it was before. We also did notice on the other side of the structure there was another wall that was also constructed at a different orientation than what the plans showed to have been included in our projects. That work has already been done. There is a large amount of riprap at the bottom of the channel. This was all underwater when our contractor started, so we weren't able to see this work ahead of time. The riprap was placed differently than what the plans showed, so we worked with the contractor to delete the walls work and then add some additional riprap and some other work around the area. We did add some riprap along the back side. This is the railroad trestle behind, or not the trestle, but the railroad tracks behind. So we added some riprap there. We did notice some erosion that was occurring, so we worked with RD 2035 on that. The picture on the right is the concrete and concrete masonry unit wall, which is basically to allow for the shallower grouting of that conduit. There's two walls, one on the canal side, one on the river side, so those are both in place. That concreting work will be completed as soon as we have an approved submittal from the contractor. There's a few more pictures from a different view. The picture on the left is the grading work on the levee itself, so the contractor was building a bit of a keyway and then building the levee material up above the old conduit that was there. And then on the right-hand side is showing some of the additional riprap and per contract riprap that's been installed on the slopes to protect it from erosion.
Quick question.
Yes.
You talked about revising the way the crane accesses the site in terms of affecting the screen plates.
Yes.
So,
Yes, Stan will talk about that as part of his update on the operations side of things. In terms of contracts, where we are with the contractor, they had their notice to proceed on February 14th. Substantial completion currently is November 16th, although I would expect they should complete a bit early now that they did get the early work done. Right around 18.7% of contract time so far. We do have a number of potential change orders that we're working through with the contractor. One of them that I mentioned is this wall and changing of riprap issue. We're essentially trading the wall construction for additional riprap, is what we're really doing. Installation of the bladder dam and canal dewatering, that was kind of an interesting issue. Partly some things that were not quite clear in the environmental document, and also a difference in field condition. As I said before, the canal was flooded during time of bidding. It wasn't known until the canal was completely pumped out that the canal actually slopes towards the outfall structure for several hundred feet away. The environmental document does not allow for pumping of that water out into land. It has to stay within the canal. So the contractor understood that. They put in basically a water-filled dam in place. But because the slope of the canal for several hundred feet up runs back to where they're pumping the water out of, they ended up having some problems keeping the water back out of what they were pumping out of. So they brought in a second dam. They actually have 2 dam systems that are in place now. So there's a little bit of a change order for that. Some sediment in the conduit that we had to remove that was not per contract. And then a keyway at the toe of the fill slope. This is on the County Road 117 side, the actual levee itself. Geotechnical reports show that we needed to add a keyway to help tie in the new levee material with the ground underlying it. I think none of these are very large dollar amounts. They're kind of things that are expected when you're working adjacent to an existing facility in a very old culvert. Some other things we've been working pretty closely with RD 2035. I kind of mentioned before, working on them with the canal work and getting the work done by April 15th. RD 2035 has notified us they are not going to be filling the canal until after April 22nd. They were impacted by the rains a bit, and it delayed their farming operation somewhat. Any questions? Okay, we'll move on to the operations update.
Thanks, Tim. You'll have to be Vanna, please, if you don't mind. So plant ran well this last quarter. There's an example there of roughly what we're looking at last month from flows. Woodland's flow is higher than Davis, although I think part of that is ASR injection. And then UCD obviously is taking around their 1.2. Met all contractual obligations. We had no unknown shutdowns or emergency shutdowns, and all reports were submitted on time. Annual PM and equipment inspections are, for the most part, complete. The joint intake, we do have the screen and brush inspection that I'll talk to here in a little bit. I have another slide associated with that.
Can I interrupt you for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm trying to understand. I always thought that this was a uniform amount of water coming through the plant 365 days of the year.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the case. We actually vary the amount of water we're moving through the plant.
That's correct. So the flow will vary based on demand of each of the 3 partners. So during the summer, the plant will be producing pretty much at max. And then during the winter months, the lower demand, it'll drop. And it's only going to produce what we, as each of the partners, call for. So
to utilize our aquifer storage and recovery, we actually ask for more in the winter so that we can feed that system.
That's absolutely correct. And on the order of 3 million, Tim, somewhere in there?
Yes, we had been injecting about 3 million gallons per day, but recently increased that to 4.
Okay. I just want, I thought the idea was to get maximum efficiency out of the plant through a uniform amount of water all through the year. But because of need, we're not doing that.
Correct. We would have nowhere to put the water if they kept it at max, yeah. And we don't have enough storage in to save it up in the winter to use in the summer.
No, I apologize. This is kind of a remedial question, but does it affect our water right if we don't use all our water? I mean, do we face any jeopardy for someone saying they don't really need 30 million gallons a day, which is what our right provides for?
That might be a question for Dick. Yeah, not at this time frame. Those evaluations on water rights are made over a longer period of usage. So in 10, 20, 30 years, the State Water Board may look at your usage over that period relative to your rights and see where you're heading. And then part of what's also relevant is whether the line over those years has been flat or whether or not it's increasing. Municipalities are interesting usage because the State Water Board recognizes that your uses historically are going to increase over a time frame. So it's not an issue here in the short term, but it's just will be something evaluated over the longer term.
I would only ask our staff keep on that and let us know when there are issues so that we can hopefully make good policy calls to protect our water right for the long term. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
Tom.
Thanks. Okay.
More and more competitive.
As mentioned last time we were here, hydrocyclones, we did have some corrosion. Jacobs is working to get that addressed. There's no integrity issues currently, but that final fix probably will occur in next fall when the demand drops, because we do anticipate demand jumping up here pretty quick. So there's no structural issues, but they probably will not conduct that final completion of the effort till next fall. And then Woodland still has one motor. One of their 3 motors was out for repairs, came back, had a little bit of a snafu when it was being put back in place. So it's right back to the electrical shop to be repaired again. Nothing staff did, but it did have some issues when they looked to test it and start it up. Okay. 2 slides. We did have an aged polymer system that was to assist with settability. That was the final. We reported that was a temporary system last time. They have finished that installation, Jacobs has. And we also modified some control settings to allow more efficient water delivery. What had been occurring is for the city of Davis Davis and UCD's transmission main, when we would get down to a lower flow rate here, especially in the winter, they were having to close one of the discharge valves from a pump, which causes cavitation, premature failure, or wear on that piece of equipment. They were able to, through looking at the pump curves, they were able to reduce the frequency for that pump, the variable frequency, to allow it to run at a lower rate, and thereby allowing that valve to stay fully open, but we can still get our lower deliveries on a consistent basis. So these things are typical for a newer plant. You go through those operational phases where you're making those adjustments to the systems. And then along that lines as well, they did modify plant operations to reduce the chlorine residual to all 3 partners. We started out at about a 1 milligram per liter residual of chlorine. This cities and UCD desired to lower that a little bit, so Jacobs worked with us to make some adjustments so that we could have a better range at that lower level. Just a couple pictures, the aged polymer system. You see, nice clean install. One thing I've noticed, definitely Jacobs, CH, formerly CH, real good care of the facility, keeps it nice and clean, and the installation is not haphazard. They really do a good job of putting the systems in. So let's go to the joint intake a little bit. So mentioned last time that we had some noise complaints due to non-sealed bearings on the the screen cleaner. Those have been replaced and are now running nice and silent. Long-term access to the cleaner and bearings, we have evaluated that.
You should have asked them if they wanted the road fixed or to have the squeaking gone. And say, okay, you want the squeaking gone? We'll do that. We'll talk next year about the road.
Right. We'll get to the road, yeah. So we did, as part of our assessment of both the bearings and the long-term maintenance of those facilities, staff did visit a number of other intakes along the river. Mostly what we found was other intakes probably have a little better design to provide maintenance for those facilities. So we could not necessarily use most of their solutions, which involved putting a road out where you could get a crane to the screens easily. So that was a bit unfortunate for that, but the last one we met with, they did have some landings that they installed, which is probably a solution we'll look at that will aid Jacobs in maintaining those systems. One of the things we also looked at is to they're required annually to look at the screens, to pull them up and inspect them and clean them, and also to look at the brushes on the screen cleaners. They're hiring divers to go down into the water to look at the brushes because we are not actually able to pull them out of the water. So they're going to hire divers to go take a look at those. As far as the fish screens go, we had the challenge of being able to move the blank screens. Were on the south side of the structure. They needed to be on the north side of the structure to be able to be put in place by the existing crane we have. And they moved the majority of them. However, one blank was too heavy for the forklift they rented to be moving on the uneven ground due to the construction. So we've asked the contractor if they would be willing to pick that and get it to the other side. And I think we'll be successful with them doing it. It's just we haven't indicated to them it's a priority to be done right this second. So So that should happen here within the next few weeks, and then Jacobs will be able to pull the screens, inspect and clean, and get them back in place. A couple other items we're looking at. We have an issue. So the seal water for our pumps it's a water based. It's not oil based. So we actually have a small well out there that provides the seal water. And then as a backup, we actually use river water with filters, which requires constant manning. As part of the project, there's actually irrigation of some landscaping out there that'll be done. So we actually have looked at putting in a second well so that the irrigation water does not impact the ability for our pumps to run. Because when we lose the seal water down to a certain pressure, the pumps actually just shut off and will not run, which is a problem.
I don't understand that seal water.
So the pumps need to be lubricated in order to not burn up and fail. Mm-hmm. So this seal water provides that, and it keeps everything lubed, keeps everything cool, so that the pumps won't burn up.
So the pumps actually sit in water.
Well, it's a small little flow through system that will allow the water to keep it cool, and lubricated. Okay. One thing we are looking at. Associated with that, one thing we are looking at is you can also do that with oil, and that relieves the need to have any type of water well or anything for that purpose. So we're looking at the cost to convert our pumps to oil-based versus water versus putting in another well to provide all of that. So once we have those costs, we'll see what the best path forward is. Okay. Back to the local systems real quick. Woodland customer complaints have been within expected ranges, virtually non-existent, I believe, is maybe a good way to put it. And then the winter months especially, they've been very calm. One thing you'll notice on the budget discussion a little later is the polyphosphate corrosion inhibitor that Woodland was potentially looking to use. They probably will not. So in fact, I think we've removed that from next year's budget. And then as we noted earlier, about 4 million gallons into the aquifer storage recovery wells, and 100% of their supply is surface water. Davis, we've had some complaints, and by several, we're looking at 8 to 10 over a few months of some bacterial growth on plumbing fixtures in the homes. We look and test the distribution system, but we are sensitive to indications of an issue inside of a home. So we have been proactive in assisting residents with looking into that. Frankly, usually when they just wash their fixtures with bleach, it goes away and it does not reoccur. But we are working with our water quality expert consultants to look into if there's anything from a distribution system standpoint we can do to maybe mitigate some of that effect. So we're following up on that. And then we're using roughly about 95% of surface water. We still have wells that run during the winter, even at low demand. One, to keep them operable and running efficiently, but two, we've also done some modifications to a couple wells that require some testing, so we want to make sure they're running. And then UC Davis has not expressed any significant concerns with their surface water. Okay.
We're happy.
That's it.
Cool.
Okay, having no questions, then we'll move on to the budget. We'll go on to item number 4, and we're going to table that item at this time. We're going to table that item at this time for later discussion.
Do you need a point of order? Do you need a motion to that effect?
No, not under your rules, unless there's a point of order from one of the other one of the other directors.
So then let's move on to item number 5. That's the discussion of potential additional water. Is that right, Don? Tim?
Yes, the next item is really more of a discussion item for a potential future board item. As you know, the agency has 2 different water rights. We have our primary water right, which is usable year-round, but is subject to Term 91 curtailments. And the agency also has a supplemental water right to use during the Term 91 curtailments. The supplemental water right has certain restrictions on it, however, and it is only available for use between April 1 and October 31. And from what I understand, there's no possibility of extending that beyond October 31 of any particular year. At the time the water rights were purchased, the agency did do an extensive review of historical Term 91, because this was a known concern at that time. At that time, the analysis showed that Term 91 had never extended beyond October 31. And this is back in 2012 timeframe. The agency looked back at 83 years of rainfall data, even before the dams existed that we have today, to look to see, could Term 91 have extended beyond October 31 with any of these rainfall conditions going back to 1922, I believe they looked at. It turned out that not one of those rainfall years would have ever triggered Term 91 extending beyond October 31. However, the more recent drought we had, this did occur in 2013, 14, and 15. It occurred 3 years in a row. So in our view, it's a relatively new risk that we have. I did put on your tables the year 2015 and 2016 curtailment years, and this is what the state looks at. The Term 91 curtailment is something that no one can predict when the state turns it on and when the state turns it off. It's really based entirely on maintaining certain salinity levels within the delta. So the Delta Water Master actually is one who sets Term 91 curtailment timeframes. So on the two graphs that you have before you, year 2015, and this is a water year, so it's a little bit different than calendar year. The 2014 curtailment ended on November 26th. The 2015 curtailment ended on December 16th, I believe. I don't have that page in front of me. So both of those did go 3 weeks and 6 weeks beyond the ending of our water rights. If Term 90, as it stands today, if Term 91 were to extend beyond October 31, what would happen is the water treatment plant would simply turn off. And the agency would still be obligated to pay the fixed portion of the cost for the operations of the water plants. We're under contract with Jacobs for that effort. We would save some money on electricity and chemical costs, but the cities and UC-Davis would then also have to convert 100% back to surface water for that duration. Due to, at least on Woodland side of things, due to the issues that occurred during conversion from groundwater to surface water and the amount of money that was spent dealing with those issues, the view from what I understand from both Woodland and Davis, that is not the preferred position of either city to go back 100% to groundwater for some time period and then back to surface water again. We would, in effect, restart that re-equilibration process. So what we're looking to do is see if we can come into a contractual arrangement with a water purveyor for a relatively long-term solution for essentially mitigating the risk, which is kind of a new risk in potential curtailment extending into November and possibly even December. What we're anticipating would be a relatively low dollar amount, thinking in the neighborhood of $10,000 or less, to reserve a block of water, and then the agency would only pay for water that would be actually used in a year that we needed it. The cities and UC-Davis do have some ability to mitigate some of that purchase. We could use some of our blending wells, and ASR wells in Woodland's case, and Davis can use some of the deep wells, and UC-Davis can use some wells to kind of, so we wouldn't run the cities necessarily 100% off purchased surface water, but I think the plan would be to have something available for us in case this does occur again. Any questions on that?
So are you seeking direction, or are you just informing us that you're doing that?
Mainly informing that we're doing it, and what we would do is bring it back as either a closed session item in the future or as a direct item on one of the next couple of board meetings to approve a contract to reserve water with the potential to purchase should Term 91 extend beyond October 31. One thing I'd like to point out real quick, in 2016, we got close. It ended October 16th of 2016, so we were 2 weeks away from November 1, and what both cities at that time were getting a little bit nervous because it takes some effort on our part to restart our wells if we have to. And we have to go and bring chlorine to the well sites, prep them, run them ahead of time, make sure everything works. So it's getting to the last second is a little bit, or even 2 weeks out, is a little bit, makes us a little bit nervous from the city's perspective.
Any questions from Camille?
No question, but I would like to really thank you, Tim, for bringing this to our attention. I think with climate change, we want to look at this as a resiliency move, and that means looking at things like this change. So I just want to give you my commendations for bringing this to our attention.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to second what Camille said about thank you for bringing this forward. And these drought years are probably maybe going to be more common and more severe. So I think whatever we can do to prudently prepare for them is in our interest.
Thank you. Any other comments? And the other thing we have to do is finish the spillway so we can store water in Orville. The spillway. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Actually, I have
Yes,
a quick question. On the aquifer storage and retrieval that Woodland is doing, so that would just be treated as a regular well. That water does not have to be recirculated through the plant?
Correct, yeah. The water that's stored in the ASR wells goes directly back into Woodland's distribution system. It would offset the need for water from the surface water plant. However, the way we've been looking at it is if we think Term 91 will extend past October 31, there's a very good chance we've been using those wells all summer, and there may or may not be water still available in those wells by the time we get to November.
Okay. And you mentioned in your presentation, and I would agree with it, there would definitely be a desirability for this to be a longer-term plan. So if you're able to find something for 3 years, that's not quite as interesting as obviously 30 years, even though the price would vary accordingly, I'm sure.
Any further comments, questions? Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. Paul, I think you have the next item is FY 18-19 budget overview.
Yeah, I think Tim's going to cover this item. You're due for a treasurer's report at your next meeting, but this will provide you an intermediate update and then again a preview of next year's budget.
Okay. Any questions of Paul or anything like that? Okay. Go on to the long-range calendar.
We actually have a presentation on the budget.
We're getting a presentation.
I thought I didn't hear that. See, my ears are bad.
First slide, last slide. Know what I mean?
So this is really kind of a quick overview of what we will be bringing forward to the board for approval at the next meeting. Couple of the main categories are capital project costs. As you know, the work at the joint intake that we're currently undertaking is directly funded by the agency. This is not going through SRF, the SRF loan reimbursement program. There's operation and maintenance costs, which are really dominated by costs related to the operation of the water treatment plant and the joint intake, which includes O&M, oversight, permitting, and agency administration. And then another major categories are SRF debt repayment schedules. Hopefully you can read this. You do have this in front of you. So this is the capital cost comparison. There's a comparison to the current fiscal year budget and then what's planned for 2018-19 fiscal year. And there's a difference. So this one is a little bit misleading in that the larger dollar items are really related to a current construction project. So it's not that we're reducing the budget till next year on some of these items. It's just that we'll pay for them this year and pay for some of them next year. Some of these are one-time items. There's certain items that have a budget item this year but not next year. Things such as agency SRF loan assistance administration. We plan on closing that loan out completely prior to the end of this fiscal year, so it will not appear next year. And there's a number of items that are that way. One of the bigger dollar items is the joint intake construction. We were anticipating that the contractor will complete roughly 60% of the work this fiscal year, and then the other 40% in the next fiscal year, plus or minus. And we'll refine those numbers by the time we get to June. That's kind of how we're looking at things today. Another thing and that follows through further down, there's agency construction management and construction contingency. Similar things with those, we're anticipating most of that will happen this fiscal year, and then remaining 40% or so next fiscal year. Further down, we have negative dollar amounts, and this is due to grant reimbursements. So it's a little bit, in a way, a little bit misleading that it's just how the timing of the grant reimbursements have came in. It's really a cash flow accounting thing rather than a true negative balance. So a couple of things on the comparison. Roughly $140,000 of items that are in the current fiscal year will not carry forward till next year. And as I mentioned, we're anticipating 60% of intake construction this year, 40% next year, and that will depend a lot on the contractor and then also the weather that they have going forward. I mentioned this earlier that we have $264,000 remaining to be reimbursed from Bureau of Reclamation, and the timing of that is very unclear at this point. We're hopeful that it will come in this fiscal year, but it may not. There's a comparison of capital budget costs between budget and actuals. Again, this is where we are through February, so there's 4 months remaining within the fiscal year, so it should always appear, at least for the most part, that the actual is less than the budget at this point, and it is. The only thing I really want to point out on that, they are generally kind of tracking that direction. Capital cost reconciliation, we haven't really begun that effort yet because we're waiting for the remainder of the grant funding to come in, and also the paperwork that show all of that. So as soon as we have that, we will get that work completed. Again, there's a few items that are we just haven't completed yet. Grant closeout on the joint intake. Joint intake construction, actual is shown as zero. However, we did just receive a pay request from the contractor, about $160,000. So we're processing that right now, but the agency has not yet paid anything on that contract. Further down to the bottom, we do have a $212,000 contingency in the project. This is for construction items that unknown things that come up during construction. $0 of that have been spent so far. In terms of O&M costs, this is the roll-up. You have the detail as one of the exhibits. I think it's Exhibit C that shows the detail on each of these categories. Overall, the budget for fiscal year 18 or 19 is less than 18. O&M budget is reduced by about $160,000 or $170,000, and that's primarily due to reduction in electrical costs and chemical costs a little bit. Now that we're in our first full year of operation, we're getting a little bit better handle on these costs, and they're a little bit less than we expected. And that's even with planning of a little bit higher water use in the next fiscal year over the current one. Agency maintenance and oversight, there's a couple of reasons for this rather large decrease. Some of it is items that are being completed, such as the fish study and refugia study. And then also we had a fairly healthy budget for attempting to resolve Woodland's water quality issues. And that has resolved itself about 8 months ago, so we have not spent some of that money. Agency administration, there's a rather large jump in that, and the reason for that is we included taxes for the next fiscal year. And that's something we can talk about as we refine the budget going forward for what actually goes into the budget that's approved in June as to whether or not to keep that in there. And something we can discuss a little bit later on. But right now we do have it in there as a $195,000 tax payment. Debt and reserve payments, those are adjusted slightly. And that's really, sorry.
Yeah, and that's the taxes on the additional water that we purchased, the assessment?
That's the taxes on the intake, or the water rights from the intake.
That's what we're discussing, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
And that right now is just in there. It's something for discussion, and we can decide to keep it in there or not, depending on where things go. SRF debt reserve payment, that is adjusted slightly, and that's really to reflect what was kind of the pre-final amortization schedule to the final one. We now have the final one. So there's a slight adjustment for that. And then below that's the revenue, how much each of the partners are paying into the project to make it all work. So in total, we're looking at right now a budget of about $323,000 less than the current fiscal year. I think I covered a few of these already, and kind of the major reasons why we're not. The chemical cost, the polyphosphate that was considered is not going in. We're planning on not doing that now because we've had about 8 months of very few comments in the city of Woodland. And power costs are reduced based on actuals. Things are operating a little bit more efficiently than initially thought. And then kind of cover the next two already. O&M reduction due to fishery studies completed this fiscal year, and also a reduction in distribution system expert assistance. Admin costs are increased by about 30%, primarily due to property taxes, and we can talk about that one again further on. And then the estimated payments for SRF are very similar to fiscal year this year. The only change is a slight change to account for the final amortization schedules. So there's a comparison between the current budget and the actuals. Again, we're 4 months remaining in the fiscal year, so the actuals should always be less than the budget. So we're tracking pretty closely in all these, although we are a bit under in some of these categories for the reasons we've already discussed. One thing that is a bit different is, the only one I'd really like to point out on this is that the SRF payments for Woodland have been substantially adjusted. This is because when Woodland had applied to have the SRF loan extended a bit, the paperwork to change the repayment schedule did not make it all the way through the process to U.S. Bank, and Woodland had in effect prepaid some of our SRF payments. So this adjustment is to account for that prepayment. So there's roughly $4 million in that one. The next steps, we will fine-tune the capital budget based on construction project and refine those numbers for the next fiscal year, and then fine-tune the O&M budget as necessary, and then we bring that to the board for approval in June. Any questions?
Yes, sorry, Camille.
No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So how does this work? Do our respective jurisdictions pay monthly towards our annual revenues for this agency?
It's quarterly payments from the members to the agency.
Okay. And, I mean, the amount you're going to charge us is fixed. We have our own rates, and we acquire those funds, and we pay you your fixed bill. You send us a bill, essentially. Is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay, thank you. Still trying to understand how we work here.
Yeah, so just one other question was on the somewhat higher admin, so 30%. Obviously, a lot of that you've already covered is property tax. The 30,000 is the past treasurer services, and that's a one-time agency admin expense?
Yes.
Is that correct?
The agreement shows that the treasury services should be billed back to the agency, and apparently that had not happened for some time, so we were catching up on past missed billings.
And could I just clarify also that on the property tax, I mean, it's essentially budgeted this year, but it's coming out of the contingencies because it wasn't in the original budget. So the overall budget year to year doesn't necessarily increase for that item, but we would be showing it in the appropriate line item. But it's not an additional cost, but we've had that discussion. Make sense?
Any further questions?
This is still a lot I don't know, but I'll ask later.
You got a question, Tom?
I don't want to make everybody else hate me.
Actually, it's good when you ask the questions.
Okay, here no further questions. We're going to move on to item 7. It's the long-range calendar. Is that where we are?
So, is there a desire to have a meeting sooner than June 21st?
Well, we talked about that, and there may be a need to call a meeting within a shorter period of time based on our expirations. And so that would, otherwise, I don't see of a need if we proceed. Is there concern for that?
No, I don't have a scheduling concern.
Okay.
It's fine.
No, I think, and you had a question on long-range calendar?
Yeah. Well, I'd like to be able to come back to long range. Well, actually, it's not really necessary. I think during item 10, board member comments, I think something might come up which
Right. We'll
the
bring
board
that
may
back.
take action to actually ask for an agenda item on a future schedule.
Okay, thank you very much. Any correspondence, Tim, you want to share?
Not that I know of.
Dick? No correspondence. Technical Advisory Committee comments.
I'll just share just an update on our local water meter project upgrade and our automated meter infrastructure. We're about a third of the way through the city of the 16,000 meters. We're replacing and adding in automated meter reading information. We're working on the software interface and the web portal, so hopefully June, our community should be able to get access to their real-time water usage, which was one of the city's goals when we talked to our community about the surface water project and helping them make water decisions and use their water more wisely. So it's going well, and we're ahead of schedule, but just I'd update you all on that.
Thank you,
Any
Bob.
questions? Good. Board member comments. Here? Will?
No.
Tom? I'll make a couple comments, and then I'm going to ask Camille.
Okay.
I had an opportunity to visit the intake today, and had an opportunity to go inside. I talked to Mr. Lang. who was the one who was primarily concerned about the progress. And the Langs were very excited about what's happening out there, and it looked like the work had been done on the canal side, and they were starting to dig on the levee side, and they seemed very, very good. In a future agenda item, I'd like to have the insurance component discussed. We apparently have insurance. 2035 has insurance. Everybody has insurance. We might be paying for double insurance. And also to visit other agencies like Aqua and other people who might provide that agency as opposed to the current county insurance, to see what would be best. And so I'd like to have that on as a future discussion as well. And then I had an opportunity to attend an award presentation by the American Society of Civil Engineers. They presented us, along with 2035, the Outstanding Water and Wastewater Project of the Year. And we accepted that award, and we now go on to the regional and the national if we qualify as a big deal. So anyway, this is a brief report, and I know we're going to get into a serious discussion on your report. So that's just my report and update. So Camille?
Okay, well, first, huzzah on the award. That's awesome.
It really
Little round of applause.
Where is it? We want to see this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big check.
It's a big check.
Oh, if only.
It's on its way.
It's on its way. So from UC Davis, out of the, there was a closed session meeting that originated a specific request from the directors to the campus to document some thinking on the part of the campus. And that resulted in the campus doing a lot of homework. And I look to my campus counsel, Kirsten Stevenson, who's here with me today. And the discussion and the work that we did led us to an understanding that this JPA, this project, has really become a program. We've completed mostly completed the construction work, and we're maturing. We are growing up, and we are really embracing a new shared ownership and shared operation role. And with that, the university would like to request an entertainment by the directors to have the UC Davis campus join the JPA formally and have a voting board seat. So we understand there's much discussion to come about what that would look like and so on and so forth, but we hope that our proposal would be entertained favorably by the board.
We could agendize that for a future discussion and the entertaining of UCD as a potential full member of the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency. And when Camille and I spoke about this earlier today, we talked a little bit about it's somewhat more complex than this joining. It talks about voting and how that might look and what the process might be. So it's going to be, if you have any questions that might help the discussion, if you could forward those to Tim or Dick so that they could actually look into those questions. That's an exciting thing to look at, UCD. My questions, were kind of in the initial thought is what do you bring to the table? And then what are your liabilities you create for us? And I don't know that there are any of either. But if you have a lot of water rights in your pocket, that's important. And so I think that in serving our members, we'd like to kind of look at what those assets and liabilities that you bring to the agency look like. And then I know that in my previous discussion with my colleague to the left, I've been very, very concerned about the initial structure of the JPA and how that might look. So those are questions that I think we need to kind of incur in that discussion. Yeah. So, and I don't know whether there are either, but I would have that concern. So, and then another thought that I just wondered about was that would put 3 votes where there's only 47% of the water going. And so, you know, how does that, because you're not a customer, you're kind of a customer of Davis's. And so.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to chime in
For
here.
later on.
Yeah, it'll be on the agenda. I think the discussion is starting to venture beyond director comments, so.
Good, thank you. Any further item to come before us? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
All right.
Yeah, you, go ahead. Yes.
So, oh, sorry to end on this note. I just want to say that your long-range calendar does show our next treasurer's report due for your next meeting, which would be through the third quarter. Just to give you a heads up that one of the things that we will be covering in there is we've been endeavoring to finalize the prior fiscal year audit for the JPA. It has slid a little bit behind schedule, as specifically due to a request to reconcile sort of all the capital costs that we've accumulated life to date for the project. And now that, as you said, we're transitioning, we're maturing, the auditors have asked for a lot of detail in terms of our fixed asset inventory and the valuation of that inventory relative to the capital costs shown in the financial statements, and it's just a bit of a painstaking exercise, so it has resulted in a delay in completion of the audit, but we hope to have that resolved, and we'll speak more to that when we're back in front of you at your next meeting. Thank you.
Is there anybody else? I didn't mean to overlook at you. Any other comments or questions? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Been moved? Been moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion adjourned. Well, we're 8 minutes late.
Hey, Greg.